Welcome, listeners, to www.ironradio.org, the website and podcast for all things strength sports and sports nutrition. With your hosts, Lonnie Lowry.
Remember, Phil is like a gnarled old oak tree held together with scar tissue and bone spurs.
Rob Fortney.
And I'm telling you, the pain that I would suffer was beyond excruciating.
And Phil Stevens.
Do it, Rob. You'll kill all those nerves.
Thanks for listening. Welcome, Iron Radio listeners. This is Lonnie Lowry. I'm an exercise physiologist, and I'm a sports nutritionist, and I'm a former competitive bodybuilder. Today, just at the beginning, I am going to do a little bit of mail and news, and then I'm just going to turn things over to Phil and Mike, who have a guest today, Jim McDonald, who wants to talk about YouTube and social media and how it affects lifting and that sort of thing. I'm very curious. I'm sad I have to miss it. I'm going to check in on that myself. But let's get right into it. This first piece of mail.
Strength and Muscle Sport News
Is by Mitch. He contacted us just a little while ago with some questions, and this time I think it's almost just a success tale that's not unlike what Phil has explained before with diabetes and using barbells, right, to help people heal. It just says, Mitch again, I have a new client who was diagnosed with Parkinson's disease 3 years ago. She had explained to me that one of her side effects was that she's unable to swing her arms while she walks. She's been going to Parkinson's-specific exercise classes for years to try to stay in shape. She started with me only 2 to 3 weeks ago, and I have been running her through a resistance training program. Today she came up to me extremely excited, explaining to me that for the first time in over 3 years, she is now able to swing her arms while she walks. Is this something you have seen before or something that is typically seen in Parkinson's patients? Thanks again, Mitch. Okay, I can say that I am aware that exercise helps Parkinson's. Parkinson's is a development of less dopamine production by the substantia nigra of the brain, and exercise seems to help. And to your point, Mitch, exercise with barbells, resistance training, may actually help even more, at least according to a 2013 paper from Movement Disorders. It's by Corcos and colleagues, Corcos. Again, 2013 Movement Disorders. A 2-year randomized controlled trial of progressive resistance exercise for Parkinson's disease. Now, I know a lot of our listeners don't necessarily have Parkinson's or worry too much about this, but it's important to understand the interplay of a lot of the things we do. Exercise, coffee, dopamine, motor patterns, that sort of thing. So this abstract just says the effects of progressive resistance exercise on the motor signs of Parkinson's have not been studied in controlled trials. So oftentimes it's other types of exercise. Like I'm aware just down the road at Kent State, there's a professor there in the exercise science program that's looking at different kinds of cycling, for example. But interestingly, these authors actually compared progressive resistance exercise with another kind of exercise that my understanding looking at this is just more basic in general, stretching, balance, a little bit of strengthening types of things. So they actually followed pairs of patients that were matched for sex and off medication scores as far as their Parkinson's disease rating scale. And I'm not really familiar with these specific scales, but interestingly, it says over a 2-year period, looking at 6-month intervals, they had a personal trainer that directed twice weekly sessions for the first 6 months and then once weekly sessions thereafter. But long story short, they had, of 51 patients, 20 in the progressive resistance exercise group and 18 in the more general group, as I understand it, completed the trial. At 24 months, the mean off-medication scale, this UPDRS-3 scale, decreased more for progressive resistance exercise than it did with the more general type exercise that they were using, and they were calling that the Modified Fitness Counts group, MFC group. Apparently, the score, decreased more for progressive resistance exercise with a mean difference of minus 7.3 points a result that was statistically significant at the p.001 level, so looking highly probable. There were 10 adverse events in the resistance exercise group. There were 7 in the other group, but it says that resistance exercise demonstrated a statistically and clinically significant reduction in UPDRS scores and is recommended as a useful adjunct therapy to improve Parkinsonian motor signs. So there you go. That's pretty cool stuff. The power of resistance exercise. Okay, one more. This came to my attention because of some of the work that I'm doing with what coffee might do as far as carbohydrate metabolism in young people and how that might work. In any case, this is specifically about insulin resistance, right? Now, a lot of young people don't have it, but a lot of middle-aged people do. In fact, 1 out of 3 Americans have insulin resistance, or similarly termed pre-diabetes, that sort of thing. Normally, when we hear about these things, we think about gut fat, right? Abnormal blood lipid profiles and that sort of thing. But this paper disturbed me a little, so I thought I would share, especially if we have people who lift very rarely. They might be big boys or big girls, but they only exercise, let's say, once a week. We've been talking about low-frequency training and that sort of thing. They don't have much of an aerobic base, that sort of scenario. They could really be hampering muscle mass, especially as they move from youth into middle age. So check this out. This is by Bazzano and Ting Ting. Long-term effects of insulin resistance on appendicular lean muscle. So we're literally talking about muscle on your limbs here. The paper is just a couple of months old here from the Journal of Diabetes and its Complications. So they start off saying insulin resistance is implicated in the process of aging, in particular cognitive and physical performance. So nobody wants their brain and, physical prowess to fade. It says, a growing body of evidence suggests that the pathogenesis of diseases commonly associated with aging, such as dementia or sarcopenia, and again, that's the muscle loss of aging, of course, unfolds many decades before later life. So this is something that starts much earlier. It's not just a disease of and for old people. If we take a look at this, insulin resistance as measured in young adulthood and its trajectories over time may affect appendicular muscle in middle age. Now, they're just talking about middle-aged people like myself. They're not talking about really old people. These findings are on the basis of data from 7 examinations in 2,118 individuals spanning 20 years across early adulthood and midlife. So they go on to explain the results a little bit. In models without adjustment for cardiorespiratory fitness, a high increasing trajectory, so you're pointing yourself to muscle loss essentially, a high increasing trajectory of insulin resistance over 2 decades between young adulthood and middle age was associated with lower appendicular lean muscle, right, lean mass in your limbs, in midlife among both men and women. Now then it just touches on a gender difference. It says, in models adjusting for cardiorespiratory fitness, so basically aerobic base, if they statistically try to remove that and just try to separate fitness itself from the insulin function. But in models adjusting for cardiorespiratory fitness, the significant effect remained only among men. So insulin resistance leading to poorer muscle mass in the limbs of men. And many, many months ago, in fact, years ago, Phil and Rob and myself, we had discussions about why do some of these older bodybuilders, they seem to lose arm mass. Like they get thicker through the trunk and they just don't have the arm and leg mass. Even though they might even still be using anabolic steroids and doing all this other things as professional bodybuilders, for whatever reason, they just, and maybe this is the reason, they start losing limb mass. It says one alternative explanation, in their opinion, is that insulin resistance promotes an initial pathway of injury to muscular health by disrupting, in part, capillary ultrastructure. So damaging your capillaries, also through inflammatory pathways that over time lead to atrophy. And then they just sort of explain a little bit that skeletal muscle is considered an endocrine organ, so we have to think about it not just as a functional like motor to move you around, but it's an endocrine organ that secretes various myokines that mediate insulin resistance. And it says, in addition, skeletal muscle is a primary tissue responsible for insulin-mediated glucose disposal. And I've read that before, that in healthy people, 70% of your blood sugar should end up in your muscles, bro. So it says accumulating evidence indicates a close relationship between sarcopenia, again, muscle that you lose as you age, and insulin resistance. I just wanted to bring this to everybody's attention. Again, if you are the kind of person who trains infrequently, you don't have much of an aerobic base, you could be strong as hell, and you could have a fair amount of lean mass now, but you may be pointing yourself to less arm and leg muscle mass by the time you're middle-aged if, you just go after extremely high-calorie diets, lots of carbohydrates, lots of sugars, and all that kind of stuff, and don't put in much volume in the gym, and you may actually be slightly insulin resistant. Now, I hesitate to say that. I'm totally speculating here, right? Because if you do exercise, you have more GLUT4, you have more glucose transporters that every time you contract your muscles, they soak up blood sugar. Or if insulin activates the insulin receptor in muscle tissue, you have more of these GLUT4 glucose transporters. So fit people are unlikely to be insulin resistant, but sometimes I do wonder when I see a really overweight powerlifter or off-season bodybuilder, and if they are in fact a little insulin resistant because of the low frequency training and not much of an aerobic base and that sort of thing, it could be a concern. Again, I hadn't seen much before on insulin resistance causing muscle loss. I've seen stuff on body fat accumulation, but it all sort of makes sense if you think about it. It's like an anti-partitioning agent. I mean, why do athletes abuse anabolic steroids and growth factors and that sort of thing? Because they partition nutrients toward muscle mass. But this scenario of insulin resistance seems to be doing the opposite. It's partitioning nutrients away from muscle mass or harming your capillary beds or inflammatory pathways, whatever's happening, and you end up storing more fat in your gut. So that doesn't sound good at all. All right, so I am done. I'm going to turn things over to Phil and to Dr. Nelson and to Jim McDonald.
Good morning, everybody. This is Phil Stevens. It's IronRadio. I'm a powerlifter, strength athlete. I run Strength Guild, do Highland Games, and a bunch of other stuff. So,
hey, this is Dr. Mike T. Nelson, creator of the Flex Diet certification, faculty member at the Carrig Institute, and I'm actually, sort of at home. I'm up to my parents' place in Minnesota, Alexandria, so I'm staring at a lake that looks like glass where I should be water skiing on, but I'm not. But I'm here. I'm excited.
And everybody, today we have Jim McD on the podcast. Jim, thanks for joining us.
Yeah, great to be here. Thanks for accommodating my somewhat later in the morning request. I'm not an earpod entrepreneur, so I'm not up at 4 a.m. typically.
No, it's good. It gives me some time to get some extra sleep before I have to go train. So
yeah, awesome.
I'm good with that. No, so I think a lot of our guests are probably familiar with you, but we need to do the usual.
Sure.
Let's start out with like a training background. What got you into training? Because that's, a lot of what our podcast is about. But
initially, it was this. I had really bad Osgood-Schlatters in my knees. Where the tendon's trying to pull away from the bone because of growth as a teenager. So I was just shitty at sports, and I couldn't run without my knee dropping. And so they offered a weightlifting class in high school instead of doing regular PE. And so I did that, and I liked it. And it, was kind of a battle to work it into my schedule from that point forward, just because it was 1970 something, and there weren't gyms everywhere you could go to. But over the years, kept at it, and then back in the early 2000s, made contact with Jesse Burdick. And he on one of those internet forums where everybody used to meet, and T-Nation, and he invited me to come watch a meet that was actually going on here in Sacramento, where I'm located. It was a APF state meet, and I had a background. I have a business degree. I have a couple of them, but I always liked film and audio. I took a bunch of classes in those areas. And when I was watching the meet, I was like, wow, like that's the intensity is just amazing. And the expressions on people's faces are so, engaging to me. And I decided I might want to get involved in powerlifting. And so he invited me to come to Diablo Barbell. So in 2004, I actually started doing that. I was driving like over an hour a day to one way to go over there 3 days a week. And that eventually led to me being involved in the founding of Super Training, which I left in 2018. And so yeah, that was I just got hooked, I guess, just watching people lift with the kind of intensity that powerlifting requires.
I got to touch on something here from the beginning of that. How many of us can link our lineage back to T Nation? It's amazing.
Most of us.
Yeah, I mean, it's amazing how many of us connected on there years ago. It's crazy. But I mean, that's how me and Lonnie initially met too. But
yeah.
And the bodybuilding.com forums are the same. There's a whole group of people there. Your Lane Nortons and Eric Helms. It was a little later than the rest of us.
Yeah.
With T Nation, but it was the same kind of thing. Want to be big? There's another one there too. I'm in a private Facebook group of people who used to be in Want to Be Big.
It's insane. So
yeah.
Now that we got the lifting out of the way, so then I mean, I think a lot of people know you from then your podcasting and social media and stuff like that. How did that come about? Where did that start and grow?
Well, it started really with YouTube. When I was at Diablo, I kept thinking, man, this is like a reality show happening all around me all the time. There was just, it was funny and there was drama and whatever. And I actually just started shooting a lot of video there with the thought of maybe doing something with it at some point. And then Super Training started, and it was, it was a different vibe because, I was a founding member. I wasn't just somebody who came along later who was, sliding into a situation. And so I just started shooting a lot of stuff. And shortly thereafter, YouTube became a thing. We ended up doing the first fitness-related YouTube voiceover videos and did a couple DVDs. And after a while, you get tired of shooting video. You've kind of seen it all, I would say that those videos were formative for a lot of people. I still hear a lot of people from a lot of people talking about how they loved those early videos and how they learned so much from them. And we were just kind of just documenting and describing what was going on in the gym. It was a conjugate-based program, sort of, not really West Side, but close. And a lot of people followed along and programmed from it. So I became interested in podcasting in sort of the first wave of podcasting, and I wondered what we could do in that space. And then in 2013 came up with the idea for the Powercast and got that started, and it just became really successful really quickly. More than I would have imagined. The engagement was tremendously greater than anything we'd ever done on YouTube.
I was the brunt of one of those early videos. I still catch shit for this from people. At one of the meets, I don't remember what I pulled. I pulled 750 or 775 or something like that.
Uh-huh.
And I literally pooped myself. I went up, cleaned up. And not 48 seconds later, after getting out of the bathroom, you throw a camera in my face and start asking me questions. Everybody's like, what is wrong with you? And that video is still going around there. And what is wrong with your face? I was like, dude, I just shit myself. Leave me alone.
But, oh, my God. I would.
Did you make the lift?
I made the lift, yeah. I don't remember the question. It was what was the single best thing I can tell a lifter or something like that?
I know. It was, best advice. Yeah,
the single. And I'm like, oh, God, Jim. I don't wipe your ass, I guess.
It's funny how things change on YouTube. When I put that together, I had just a piece of royalty-free music that played underneath it. And this week I started getting popped for copyright stuff on that.
Really?
Like, all these years later, and you have to document back like where you got the music and stuff. But that was like a long time ago.
Oh yeah, it was. Yeah.
It was a very long time ago. So, I mean, I remember purchasing that music. I actually had to look it up this week in 2010, and it's 2019. So, yeah. Anyway, you know, I enjoyed that that kind of informational entertainment storytelling kind of stuff, and yeah, it's still thousands and thousands and thousands of people still watch this stuff all the time.
Yeah. So then you grow. I mean, the PowerCast turns into a juggernaut. You have all that going on. Where are you headed now? What do you got going on?
See, I left in the show ended in 2018. I did a 9-episode solo show, and I was really happy with it. It was really a lot of work. And after a while, I decided to reteam with Mike Farr, Silent Mike. And now we do a show called 50% Facts, and it is back in the same feed as the original PowerCast because I started the show, so I own that. And the format of that show is that we take a particular question, like one question in health and fitness, and try to answer it ourselves. And then we bring in an expert at the end to actually tell us what the real deal is. So it's kind of like a bro science versus real science arrangement. It's a lot of fun. We have a pretty smooth production process. We're just actually getting ready to add video to that so that there'll be a YouTube version that will not necessarily directly track the audio version. Since we started in YouTube, it sort of makes sense that we would be there, except that I fell in love with being able to edit the audio and make it be exactly what I wanted it to be. Yeah. And it's taken a little while for me to decide that it's okay for the video version to be significantly different. There was a video version of the PowerCast that, I did both versions. I produced both versions, and it was a lot of work. And I learned over time that I really liked the audio editing to, just clean things up and clarify points and take away people's crutch words and all that kind of stuff. And I decided that I couldn't do that for video. Yeah. And so I backed off the video version, but we're getting ready to actually spool that up in the next couple of weeks here.
Nice. I think that's how we just put the audio version on both now. Yeah. And just with a little picture up. But a lot of that's because we're just too lazy to go with video, and I don't want to put clothes on. So
I understand that. Yeah, I totally understand that. I also am in conversations with Michael Fahey, who directed, produced West Side versus the World, about doing a podcast relative to the return of the WPO.
There you go.
Which I think could be a big deal.
Oh, yeah. Well, I mean, it was interesting to me. We talked about this not long ago about, like, it seems like Raw lifting, like, did away with multiply. But from what you were telling me, is like multiply hasn't changed. It's just Raw lifting has gotten much bigger.
Yeah, I think I think that Michael's research through Open Powerlifting seems to show that the same number of people, the same basic number of people are competing every year. Just we don't see it because it's not necessarily in our areas, and there's so much more Raw.
Yeah.
Just Raw really grew. It really exploded. I remember being surprised by that at the time because like my entree to powerlifting was all gear, like all the time. As much as possible, as many layers as you can get away with. And then Stan Efferding came to our gym and was competing Raw and looking to compete against, I think it was Johnny Jackson at that point.
Yep.
For World's Strongest Bodybuilder at the Olympia. And just so much grew up around that. I mean, that the meet that we did for him ended up having no entry fees, and it was during the economic downturn, so nobody had any money anyway. And And the videos that came out of that made a big difference. I didn't actually shoot those. My father was in the process of passing away, and it was kind of in an 8-day period where he was passing away, and so I didn't actually get to shoot very much of that. But my son shot it for me, and then Backyard Meat of the Century 1 and 2 made a big deal, a big splash in raw lifting. My God, I'm blanking on it. The big raw meat in Florida.
Oh, Raw Unity or whatever.
Raw Unity, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
All of those things seem to make a difference, and they sort of rode the wave and created this whole situation we have now, where people believe that that knee sleeves were, classic old powerlifting, which was not true at all.
Yeah.
I get comments every day, people saying, "Oh, I don't like sumo," or "Don't arch when you bench," and all this bullshit. It's like, come on, folks, seriously? Yeah. Like, who anointed sad internet guy as the commentator for what gear should be used in powerlifting?
Yeah. No, I still get in arguments about that with sleeves versus wraps all the time. It's like, oh, sleeves are old school. No, they're really not. But back to the 50% podcast. I think you hit on it briefly there. I think the big thing that I like about it is that the whole bro science and real science, whereas a lot of podcasts are 100% bro science. And, both of them are interesting. And you guys, oddly enough, from the ones I've listened to, you actually do a pretty damn good job at not being idiots. Your bro science isn't that far off many times. But but then you get the reassurance from the expert. It's kind of a...
right, yeah.
Nice.
There's nothing that we can say that an expert can't say better.
Yeah.
We're not stupid, I guess, and we're not uninitiated in these areas. We're going to move toward areas where we both have less of a strong footing, let's say. And so it's more likely to be a bigger difference between the bro science and the real science. That's kind of always been the plan, is to continue to expand it. The whole idea of the show was to kind of create a resource where people could find the one thing that they were looking for. The whole podcasting world tends to be like longer shows with multiple topics, and most people don't do detailed show notes that give you a time stamp for when you can listen to somebody talk about a particular thing.
Mm-hmm.
So that's why we have a time stamp for when the expert comes on. If somebody just wants to consume the show that way, they can. Mm-hmm. And as long as they listen to the ads, I don't care.
Yeah. Well, even that, though, in and of itself, I think is very interesting. Like literally touching on a topic you really aren't educated in and just guessing.
Yeah.
That's kind of interesting. It's like, let's see how close I really am, when we bring the expert in. But at least I like the fact that then you are bringing the expert in, because there's so many people out there just diarrheaing on a microphone, and then people believe it. So you're backing it up with something substantial. So.
Yeah, that was the idea. I didn't want to I'm not a guru. I'm not an expert in any of the health and fitness topics. I would be happier hearing from somebody else to tell me exactly what's up, or to tell me that it is not decided, and that that things that people take as fact are maybe not. They're just things that have gotten currency on the internet that don't necessarily have a lot of factual basis. But the thing is that people just want to be led on topics. They want somebody to tell them a thing, and having an expert come in is helpful in that regard.
Oh yeah, I mean, I think that's probably true with almost anything. I mean, how many times, Mike, do we get like, tell me exactly how many fishbowls to take? It's kind of in this range, Yeah. I mean, everything's kind of gray area. I mean, not much is really set in stone.
Yeah. No. That's kind of one of the things that we've learned. We're 40-something episodes in now, is that things are not as solid as you think they would be. Another one is that everything is how you should act is a lot more simple than people want to make it.
Yes.
You know, how you should train, how you should eat. All these things are relatively simple. People just don't like to believe it because it doesn't seem like enough. And I mean, how many times does somebody start a diet and exercise routine and they want to throw every variable in the world into it because they're like, you know, I'm somehow short on time. Like, you know, I only have, you know, 5 years to, you know, be on the beach in Mexico during the summer, whatever. And so they throw everything into the kitchen sink at their particular problem. And then they wonder why either things don't work because they switch them up, or they just did so many things it's difficult to tell what actually worked.
Yeah, one of my little favorite phrases is physiology is complex, but your actions are simple. Right, and this could be from having an in-depth discussion about a deadlift to protein to whatever micronutrient, but at the end of the day, you pick the weight up off the floor, you eat the steak, you eat the vegetable. It's all the actions themselves are actually relatively simple, and people just want to confiscate both of them, right? You got the people who are like, physiology is so simple, like don't listen to a bunch of those nerds, and you know, don't listen to that advanced lifter, that's, you know, too complex. And then you've got people who want to just make all their actions like way too complicated. It's like, oh no, I need these 18 different things, like you said, to get lean for Mexico. It's like, no, you probably just need to start with eating less. You know?
Right. Yeah. Yes, exactly. Like they kick off the morning with a bunch of butter or coconut oil in their coffee, and then it's a nutritional choice after nutritional choice after that they've pulled from the internet and not really thought about, how many calories might there be in that, and
there's no insulin release, so you're okay.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. That's, oh my God. I think we've all seen that. Now, I mean, we get pitched because we work with an agency that gets us sponsors, and there'll be things that come up that, you know, we have the opportunity to say no to things, and we've said no a number of times because, like, no, that's like seriously bro science. Like, we're trying to have some credibility with this show. You know, we're not trying to sell somebody something that is going to be a waste of their time and their money.
So you're not sponsored by a Deer Velvet supplement to raise your testosterone? That's not a key sponsor yet?
We are not.
I guessed on that. I'm like, I hope you're not going to say, well, we just had that episode aired, but
no. And you know, like the most recent thing that we turned down was a CBD, and like everybody's doing CBD.
Yeah.
And if you've tried it, like I've tried it, and I didn't find that it did anything. It's like, well, if I'm going to do it, the way it has to work is somebody's going to have to give me some, or I'm going to have to buy some of a brand that I felt like actually worked for me. And then I might be willing to endorse it.
Yeah.
But even still, it's an area that's somewhat tainted because everybody's doing it, and not everybody gets the same results.
Yeah, and there's such a... I mean, I do a lot of talks on CBD. I have one coming up again, and it's hard because, like, even the podcast I did recently, they're like, oh, it's all crap. I'm like, well, it has all of the markers of something that looks very scammy because you can buy it everywhere now. It's claimed to do everything under the sun, and there's you know, how many different companies have just sprouted up overnight and selling at a price point that I know it's not, there's no way it can be legit, you know. And then on the flip side is there's some, you know, pretty interesting possible good uses for it too. But it's and it's not like caffeine or something that you may necessarily feel. You may be a little bit of anti-anxiety or things of that nature. But if you're not a real anxiety-driven type person, then you probably won't notice any different either. So I agree that it's right in the middle of that area, and it's becoming one of those things where it has all the, let's say, the bad markers of the supplement industry that I thought died in the 80s and 90s, but it looks like it hasn't.
No, it reminds me of a story. I don't remember. It was 4 or 5 years ago. I was walking around the Arnold with Windler, and everybody's always reaching for something, the next greatest thing. And we're looking at all the booths as we roll through there, and there was one booth in particular that had no one at it, not one person. and it was a testosterone replacement booth. And it was like the one thing in this building that actually works, and there's no one there. It's guaranteed to work. So we both had a good laugh for that. But
well, we haven't gotten that pitch yet, but we'll be on that wagon. Yeah, we've done hair loss prevention. I'm fine with it. I know that those drugs exist. I know that they work. They have, for a lot of people, they have a long, proven history in that regard. We've done erectile dysfunction meds. Those things work. People know about them. They're fine. I'm okay standing behind those, but it seems like CBD, I'm not there. Something like Kratom, I would never endorse because there are issues there too. So, this is where we are with the industry. I'm happier with, things like luggage and protein supplements, Warby Parker glasses, and, the mainstream podcast sponsor merry-go-round.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's like the stuff people send me in the mail, too. Like, I've even been pretty open. It's like, no, I don't want your CBD you made in your bathtub. Like, don't send it to me. I'm not going to take it. Because people hear, like, you talk about CBD, and they're like, oh, let me send you some. I'm like, dude, the amount of time it's going to take me to figure out if I even want to, take it myself is insane. I'm probably just not going to spend the time doing it on your product I've never heard of. On the flip side, it's like, why can't someone, like, send me, like, protein and fish oil? It's like, send me stuff I'm going to use.
Yeah, we actually are picking up a protein sponsor, which is not something we've done before. And we were on an onboarding call with the CEO of the company who was telling us, what don't you like about my product, so that I can take that back to my team. It's like, well, that's new to me. Is normally with protein companies that tell you it's the very best, and it mixes well, and it tastes amazing. It tastes like a milkshake. How many times did you read it tastes like a milkshake? Yeah. So we're trying to play in a different arena with that because, hey, we got to pay the bills. I'm sitting in a studio that isn't free, largely because it's very difficult to work out of my house or Mike's house or whatever. It's just it's a lot easier this way, and I can also produce other shows in this space, which it's very difficult. I don't know about you guys. You guys have been doing this for 10 years, so you're plus. So you guys know it is difficult to do a weekly show. It is difficult to get the personnel to do a weekly show with you. It's just it's time consuming, and you have to streamline it as much as you possibly can to make it viable.
Oh yeah. Yeah, and I mean the biggest thing for us has been there's multiple of us, because there have been times, like the one thing we've done is never miss a week, but there's been lots of weeks I missed, or lots of weeks Lonnie missed, and that helps so much, because we'd be ruined if not. But, life happens.
We batch record our shows. We typically record the front end of each show just in one session. The front ends of each, like if we're going to talk to an expert about 3 topics, we record the front end of those, and then when we bring the guest in, we record the back end of each one. So just like boom, 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 and then throw them together, and that's the show.
Nice. There you go.
It allows us to get ahead. It allows us to get ahead. That's if the show were not formatted that way, I don't think it would be possible to do that.
Yeah. I can't. I probably shouldn't give away this information on air to our listeners, but I'm gonna. I don't know how many weeks. It's like Lonnie calls me up, and we're like, oh shit. All right, bro, we got to go on there. What are we going to talk about?
I think that's it.
It always works, man. So let's go ahead and take a break, and then we're going to come back and talk about the topic of the day, which is how social media, YouTube, all that has affected lifting.
Hey, listeners, this is Dr. Lonnie Lowry. If you've ever had anyone critique you on your protein intake as part of your weightlifting lifestyle. Oh, you poor meathead. All that extra protein is going to rot your kidneys or weaken your bones or dehydrate you or give you gout or who knows what. There is a book available. You could simply Google CRC Press and Lowry. And what I've done is reach out to experts all over the world and create a book, a single compendium that you can hold up and say, this is why I consume extra protein.
This can be very valuable when you're being quote-unquote educated by various professionals on the topic. There's an enormous amount of literature in this book on the safety, the effectiveness, how protein works in cells, the history of protein and weight trainers, much more. So again, please check out CRC Press and Protein and Lowry. You can just Google that. And I do, full disclosure, I do make a small single-digit royalty on the book, but that's not why I did it. I did it so we can all have something, our particular population, to both defend what we do and to inform our nutrition and our eating. Thanks. IronRadio is, of course, primarily a podcast. But over the years, there have been technical glitches calling for backup streaming and listeners who wanted the convenience of other sources of audio content. Toward this end, IronRadio is now simulcast and backed up on YouTube. If needed, please search Lawnman07 or IronRadio from within YouTube. There's not much video, but if you like to listen through YouTube on a Roku or other living room device, there you go.
Like your weekly fix of Iron Radio? In addition to being a popular institute on iTunes, we are also on email. Simply go to www.ironradio.org and sign up for the voluntary email. You'll get a once per week email, no more. That's little more than the show notes and a link to the audio. So go for it.
Okay, everybody, we're back, and again, we have Jim McD on. He's joining us from California. We're going to talk about how lifting over the years has affected, or how social media and YouTube has affected lifting. So, Jim, take it away, man. I want to hear what you got to say about this.
Well, I remember back in maybe 07, 08, looking at this thing called Google Trends. And if you put in a keyword, it tells you just how many times something's been searched. And the curve for powerlifting just it was like down. It was like didn't start from a high place at that point and was trending down. But well, this is going to die as a media topic. We can do everything that we want to do in the world, but people are not going to be interested because basically it's dying out. And I had every reason to believe that was the case because it was very multiply driven at that point. And, the WPO had hit the skids, which is, sort of the thing everybody thought was the highest level of achievement. And the APF seniors was a little all over the place at that point. The APF in California got very strange for a while there. And I still don't know if it actually still exists. Anyway, it really looked like it was dying off. And then somewhere along the line, some of the stuff I was talking about earlier, those, raw meets and getting the videos up of those online and the live streams out of our meets, out of Raw Unity. And then suddenly a whole bunch of youngsters got involved in powerlifting because they saw those clips and others, and it just started taking off. People had channels about their lifting, like their individual lifting, which wasn't so much a thing before, that were popular. I think that Instagram may have had the biggest impact from the social media standpoint. I think that CrossFit using some of the methodologies made a big difference too, because CrossFit got hot. The Olympic lifting world and the powerlifting world and the gymnastics world all benefited enormously from the growth of CrossFit.
Oh yeah, huge. How much of this, I mean, goes to, like we talked about at the beginning of the show, like all of us kind of met on a forum, and forums were huge, and this was before social media was big.
Right.
Social media gave kind of all those people on those forums a place to go then.
Right.
Because I mean, I can't deny how much, like before forums, you just had to run into somebody that did this shit. And then those came about, and how huge did that help us? I mean, that's how I was able to connect with you and Burdick and Mark and Jim, and all of us were on there. And then this stuff comes around. So, I mean, it's been kind of growing from that. I mean, the forums seemed like kind of the first place that allowed this to start to develop, and then this explosion of Facebook and Instagram and YouTube. And so, would you agree? I mean, that's kind of how it started, was there, and then it was the next step.
Oh yeah, and I think that social media in large part has replaced those things. Not entirely replaced them, but they're certainly not what they were before. They're certainly not the prime influencer anymore, the way they were back in the maybe early 2000s. I still have a group of friends that from the early 2000s who are, a lot of them are like people in the industry now, like actual, like real people who were just kids back then. Eric Cressy was one of those people back in the day. And they had an enormous influence. A lot of those people wanted to write, and a lot of them did. Some of them got into search engine optimization as experts. Some of them got into program development, ebooks, that big funnel marketing. And that's kind of the other part of it, the other part of the fitness industry that, powerlifting hasn't really benefited as much from, I think, that kind of marketing approach.
Mm-hmm. So, I mean, how do you think it is? What's been the biggest benefit, maybe? And then potentially what's the biggest downfall? I think I can answer that myself, but I'd like to hear what you have to say.
I think the biggest benefit is that people saw it as something they could do. Like I can go to especially when we got into the more raw era. It's like I could go to a gym and I could lift in this particular way and I would get stronger. I might not be as strong as some of the people that I see, but I could get stronger. There are people who look like me, who are not necessarily any stronger than me, who are competing in powerlifting. I could do that if I wanted to, and if I stick with it, I could get stronger. I think that's maybe the biggest benefit is bringing people into the sport. I think that the other thing is obviously it's more possible to sell things to those people now than there used to be. Dave Tate used to say, and he probably still does, that powerlifters were kind of the worst customers because they were cheap and broke, some combination of cheap and broke. And now that's not really the case. I mean, it's crossing a lot of socioeconomic lines. A lot of young professionals get into powerlifting who would not have before, I think. I think that helps. I think that the detrimental thing is that it really drives ego. And you see a lot of I see a lot of things, people doing things in particular Instagram videos that they probably shouldn't have done because it doesn't actually make sense and they're trending. It doesn't benefit them other than how it looks on social media.
Yeah.
So what's your answer, Phil?
Well, I mean, my answer would be, I mean, it's like that. It's given a lot of people the ability to say, yeah, I can do this. The other thing, and we talked about this a lot, it gives a voice to so many people that shouldn't have one.
Yeah.
It's so easy to have a really big voice now.
Yeah.
I mean, who's going to be the police? You can't, that's just like with anything, like who's going to be the governing body of everything fitness? Right. Nobody will ever be able to tell you that because nobody will ever agree.
Right.
But, I mean, one of the big things to me, I think, and you correct me if I'm wrong, I mean, women in lifting, when I started,
oh yeah,
there would have been maybe, you were surprised to see one woman at a meet. And now, I mean, I have to believe that social media has greatly helped that rise in women being in the sport. And now they are huge. They are it, in my opinion.
Yeah. I think that they've proven that we can't look at them that way anymore. You can't look at them as not strong, not able to be strong. They are very many times more dedicated and steady with their lifting than guys could be. Mm-hmm. I think that CrossFit helped that too, because you saw a lot of women in CrossFit, like muscular women in CrossFit, performing well, really well. And I think that just that image makes a difference. There were women back then, but the percentage was so much smaller than it is now.
Yeah.
Something else you said spurred something. Oh, I know actually what it was. I was thinking, just back to for a second. There isn't any like overlord of social media that makes people prove that things are true. There isn't any overlord of YouTube or podcasting or whatever that makes people have to conform to certain standards. And I think that's been good, but it's also been really bad. And it's the podcasting space confounds those of us who do it all the time, because kind of anybody, and now even celebrities, are getting into it and spouting off a lot of stuff that isn't necessarily helpful.
Yeah.
And there's no accountability.
Part of it just sort of breeds controversy. I mean, you could be kind of a nobody or have no following and just put out something extremely controversial and be really loud about it, and it just seems like people are drawn towards that, and it may not necessarily be the best information or even vetted, or the person even has any background in it at all, but it'll get eyeballs and ear holes attracted to it.
Oh,
yep.
That's nothing
yeah,
new.
Who's the dude? I'll probably get myself in trouble here, but who's the dude that like sits in his car with a do-rag on and yells?
Oh,
and just gets huge hits. I mean,
it's so not my thing.
for just, I mean, he's literally just pissed off. Is all it is. And I mean, not the saying it's bad. I don't know, because I really don't listen to it, because I just can't.
Yeah.
But yeah. So
I don't know the name of that particular one. I know what you're talking about, because I've seen little snippets go by. You see them on other social media platforms.
Yeah.
I think that's another thing too, is that I was at Podcast Movement a couple of weeks ago in Orlando, and one of the things they talked about was that you don't think about it as a podcast anymore. But the podcast is just the audio version of your show, and your show can have many other versions, including video, or on social media platforms that maybe it's not always the same. Maybe it's snippets out of it, but maybe you can provide additional information in another media format that reaches people and reinforces the audience of the show. And it seems to me that the people who are most successful are doing stuff like that. They're broadened out across many platforms. You can see, somebody's snippets of somebody's YouTube video on Instagram or on Facebook or one of the other platforms, and they just are coming at you from all angles, whether they're good or not.
Yeah, and that's likely an area we've probably failed greatly on. we just don't do that.
Yeah.
But we've held fast to we just want to put out good stuff.
Yeah. Well,
and that's literally all we're about. But
what is it that
jobs too? We have other things we have going on.
Yeah, we have
a limited time thing and budget.
Yeah.
Right. That's very true. The what was it that Max Aida always says about that he was always told about getting a lift? Either execute the lift as best you can, or as perfectly as possible, or however you can.
Yeah.
And I think that it comes down to that. Like, what can you sustain? And when we started 50% Facts, the idea was, how can we construct this in a way that we are comfortable that we can sustain it, and then we can add to it over time, should we feel so moved. And we're finally at the point of feeling so moved about adding video.
Well, and that's probably goes back to when we talked about people starting a new fitness or diet regimen. Is probably the same thing.
Yeah.
Everybody jumps into this podcast field and they're like, oh, we're going to do it all. And then they realized a month in that, oh, I'm overwhelmed.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
it can be overwhelming for sure.
Yeah. And then you see it's gone. There's 4 episodes and there's no more.
Yeah.
How many of those are there? Probably more than there are that have lasted.
Yeah, I've seen estimates about that. There are maybe 700,000 or so podcasts listed on Apple Podcasts, iTunes, and more than 500,000 of those have pod faded. They did a few episodes, or they did a couple years or whatever, and then they just stopped. And that's kind of the thing I ran into with the solo show that I did. I loved it, but I made it so much work for myself. I will revisit it at some point. I have other stories that I want to tell there, but those first 9 were the ones that I felt most strongly about, and they just took a lot of effort.
Yeah,
really sucked it out of me.
So I had a quick question about any opinion on length, because I've heard people now say that very short snippet, daily-ish type podcasts are becoming more popular, but yet when you look at some of the rankings, you see guys like Joe Rogan who do very long, sort of specialized type shows. Or do you think it just goes back to whatever you can put out, just put it out and be consistent?
I think that is correct. I think that whatever you can put out and be consistent with is the way to go. I think that the option of shorter shows is a good thing. We intended, because the show we were doing before was at least an hour, sometimes 2. And I didn't want to do that again. So our target is about 35. We do 45, usually not more than 50, 55. And some of that has to do with how much information the expert has for us, and some of it has to do with how long the opening segment goes, where Mike and I just bullshit. And that's something that we could honestly cut, and I have done that. That was another one of the reasons why I didn't jump into video, because I felt sometimes we went a little long there, and now we don't anymore. I feel pretty comfortable with the amount of time that we spend BSing. It's the personality establishment part of the show. People who have been following us for a long time, I think that's a thing that they key in on, is that's when we actually show what our relationship is. And basically it's like sitting in the room with us. And we don't usually wander way off track. A thing about Joe Rogan that people don't necessarily understand is that most people who are fans of Joe Rogan's do not listen to every show that he produces, and they certainly don't listen to every minute of every show. That's part of why he front loads his ads.
Yeah, definitely.
Because he's going to get people in the first 10 minutes. They don't skip that. His interests are all over the place. And he's Joe Rogan. Yeah. I mean, that's if you're not Joe Rogan, you maybe shouldn't do 2 or 3 hour podcasts.
Yeah. Here's a question. This is something I've been thinking about for a while, and you are probably the person to ask.
Sure.
Powerlifting meets and streaming or video one. I've been to a lot, and I watch the streams, and I do this and that. And in my head, none of them are done well. But I think it could be.
Okay.
I think there's an opportunity for somebody, like you've been to powerlifting meets too, and there's a shit ton going on besides on the platform. In my mind, if you had some kind of crew that, of course, you have the camera on the platform, but if let's say you ran 3 cameras, platform, back room, something else, and commentators. In my head, you could make a full day of very interesting content that could be on ESPN or could be on whatever. I mean, if you had the right people. Why hasn't this happened, and will it?
Why hasn't it happened is a really good question. It's I think that a lot of basically you're talking about like kind of sideline reporters or people who are backstage picking up stuff. I don't know why that hasn't happened. That one seems like a gimme to me. It could just be resources. Commentators, I think, is something that I know that the new WPO stuff that's going to be for streaming will have commentators to help fill things in. But I think that without the kind of human interest like packages that they run about a lifter's background, or that that they could run, the things that they do for World's Strongest Man or for the Olympics, particularly for the Olympics, I think that would all help. I don't know what is coming. I think that to be able to sell it to a broader audience, we need those things.
I mean, just in my head, I think even if you had 2 cameras, one in the back room, one up front, I mean, how interesting would it be? Because, I mean, literally, how long does the lift take? 15 seconds?
Yeah.
With the walkout and everything?
Yeah. Yeah.
And then the majority of the time is loading and crap. So you come, you film that lift, you talk about that lift, and bam, right to the back room. Here's Eddie Cohen. He's in the back room. What do you have to say? You know, whatever. Yeah. You know, there's so much, and you could keep that. Or, you know, there's dumb shit that happens in the warm-up room all the time that is much more interesting than the platform.
My understanding from Michael Fahey on this WPO ESPN thing is that he's not producing it. There is an actual producer that produces live events that will be handling that. And so maybe they'll do that. I don't know. I wish I had an answer to that question.
I think it could be gold, man. I think if I had the time and money and commitment, I would do it. But so
I feel you on that point, and that's I used to like to film people's basically their psych up before they get the platform. That to me was sometimes much more meaningful than watching the lift, and I could sometimes tell whether people were going to make the lift based on psych up.
Predict.
Yeah. So, all right, let's call it there, man. It was good having you on. So, you got anything to say? Where do people go to find the podcast and stuff that's coming up in the future?
I am at the Jim McD on pretty much all the social media. The show is 50% Facts, where percent is a word. So we're on Instagram and Twitter, and then I am on Instagram, Twitter, Facebook. And that's anything I do going forward. You'll be able to find it there.
There you go. So
cool. Thank you so much. Appreciate it.
Thanks for having me on, guys.
Yeah. We will cut it there, and we'll talk to everybody next week.
Hey listeners, have you seen the store at IronRadio.org? There are 3 halls in the store. One for Phil, one for Fortress, and one for myself, Dr. Lowry. And they're thematic. So you can go into our Halls of Iron store and choose based on your goal. If you need something to learn or read or something nutritional, you can look in my store, Lonnie's store. If you want something about injury prevention or competition, then take a look at Phil's Hall of Iron. And if you want something about motivation or daily training, Fortress's Hall has what you're looking for. There are some fun, heroic descriptors as you browse through the stores. We try to make it a little more fun than the average boring online store. And whether you're a novice lifter or someone more experienced, you can take heart that you're not wasting your time. The things that we put in each Hall of Iron are actually based on our own recommendations. Protein powders that we know to be good, knee sleeves, wraps of some kind, things that Fortress uses in his own training. The stuff you see, you know is good. This way you don't waste time. So check out the Iron Radio store at ironradio.org and let us know what you think on the forums, and certainly you can request products and we will screen them before they go in. So thanks for listening. Iron Radio is accepting donations. If you like what we do, the professors, the scientists, the bodybuilding show promoters, the athletes themselves in powerlifting and bodybuilding, please consider making a donation or maybe buying something from the ironradio.org store. We also are accepting supporting members. So for $4 a month, which is frankly less than the bank sneaks out of your account in fees, you can step up and support a form of sort of public radio for the bodybuilding and powerlifting and strength community. The Iron Radio podcast and all of the audio on ironradio.org is for informational purposes only. If you're interested in starting a diet or exercise program, it's important to check with your physician. Also seek the help of registered dietitians, athletic trainers, and qualified exercise physiologists in order to make the progress that you need.